So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Father Calin Tamiian. I probably butchered his name. And he is going to be talking about pastoral care at the end of life. And then after that, we'll have time for questions and answers of all of our speakers tonight. So please welcome Father Calin.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. My name is pronounced Calin Tamiian. I was born and raised in the famous area of the world, Transylvania. That's part of Romania of today, but that's why my specialty is end of life. I am a Catholic priest, but I belong to the Byzantine Rite of the Catholic Church. And when Molly invited me to come and to speak to you, we didn't know, we didn't plan this, but I saw it as part of the providential plan that I have a chance to talk to you on the feast day of St. John Chrysostom, which is one of the fathers of the Byzantine tradition. Actually, as a matter of fact, I was late because I just finished celebrating the Divine Liturgy of John Chrysostom for tomorrow, which is the triumph or the exaltation of the Holy Cross. And I never thought that I would be doing this kind of ministry, the ministry in the hospital, but it kind of landed in my lap and ended up being something that I am very comfortable with. I have been doing it now for about a couple of decades. I did my residency as a professional chaplain at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a huge hospital and a good teaching hospital. And then I've been working for the last 15 years at St. John's Hospitals in Camarillo and in Oxnard, where for the last 7 years or so I now manage the Department for Spiritual Care. Because I manage in a heavily Western part of the spirituality of the church, I was blessed to receive spiritual faculty. So this allows me, for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, to go along and to celebrate the Eastern Rite sacraments of the church, and then also in accordance with the needs of the hospital, as well as Santa Clara Parish, where I am the most familiar with, help out with masses, as well as with the sacraments in accordance with the needs of the Western Rite. So for that, I am immersed, I will say, not only in the spirituality of the church, but also very familiar with the cultural dimensions of humanity, and especially how that plays an important role when people come to speak about the end of life. Ultimately, if we are to actually really consider what pastoral care is at end of life, besides one's theological formation, like in my case as a Catholic priest, it brings the dimension of the emotions and the cultural dimensions, and the chaplain often finds himself as being a broker in what is important to people in accordance with who they are and what they are meeting in the last final moments of their lives. Now let's back up a little bit. The reason why I mentioned the last final moments is because that's where it gets often more difficult. But the reality is that all of us are having this conversation tonight because of the very rapid changes that the development of technology and medicine is imposing on all of us. Let me explain. About only 100 years ago, the life expectancy has been just about 47 years. That's all. Not only that, the life expectancy was only 47 years, but the truth is that pretty much everybody, about 90% of the population, will have a very fast and sudden death. I always like to use the example of George Washington, which I consider him as the Dracula of the Transylvanians. And I'm saying that with a humor aspect because actually Dracula for us Romanians is a national hero, just like George Washington is a national hero here. So I don't know how in the world he ended up being such a bad vampire in the United States, but that's another conversation. I love the example of George Washington. If you remember from your history, he basically died in a matter of about 2 days. Got a throat infection. It wasn't penicillin that could help him. It was no antibiotics. And basically that killed him in a matter of 2 days. Thus, we, the priest, would have loved at times because we had a whole different kind of ministry in the hospitals and to the elderly and the dying than what we are faced to have today. Why? When you have somebody who is now actively dying, is at that time happening in a matter of slowly declining, things are getting worse steadily, and the person will expire in about 2 to 3 days. Now, how different is that from the reality of today's world? The truth is that pretty much everything has been turned upside down. About 90% of the people now actually die a very slow death that actually often, because of the kind of chronic disease management that we have, might take place over a time of even decades. Think about what you have experienced in the 80s with the AIDS and how scary that was at the time. And now you have people that are HIV positive for decades, and even people that go on with long lives even when now it's full-blown AIDS. And how much of a change that was happening. So about 90% of the people now are kind of having this very slow decline, often unperceivable, and then maybe a catastrophic event that just kind of renders them incapacitated and unable to take care of themselves. But for a good long time, they kind of can push away those worries and say, I have cancer. But, I'm okay. I'm going for treatments. I'm active. I'm still able to enjoy my family and my time. I'm still able to go to church. I'm still having a very productive life. And they go on for months and months. Not every story of every person is the same. All our stories are unique, just like the way we all are. But nevertheless, majority of the cases, the reality is that we are now facing a whole different type of dying process. And so, for many of us as priests, what is happening now, you have a person that, yes, they have some sort of an ailment that is debilitating to them somewhat. But nevertheless, they go on. You see them at church. You see them at all kinds of activities. And yes, they might have to come with a walker, or yes, they might have to have even the help of a wheelchair or an assistant, but they are still very much active. And then, one day, it's either the heart that gives up, or it's either, a respiratory event that might take them, or just a sepsis of some sort or another. And then before you know it, the priests don't even have a chance to get on time to them to do what in the past we used to call the last rite. Even that is a terminology that actually in today's hospital is very rarely employed correctly. People might talk all the time about last rites, but when was the last time that one of us as priests really had a chance to be able to listen to the confession, to be able to do the viaticum, and then to be able to also provide the anointing of the sick? It's rare. My experience in the hospital is a cold blue in room so-and-so, and I run for my life trying to get there, and I'm hoping that I might get the person before they get to be intubated. But most of the time, by the time I arrive from my office or whatever other ministry I'm doing in the hospital to that place of crisis, the person is already intubated. They already had a catastrophic event that renders them incapacitated to be able to speak, to be able to receive the sacraments, to be able to express anything. That's why I was so impressed to see that you had a chance to go in great details to talk about pulse and the importance of physician order for life-sustaining treatment, as well as the advanced directives. Now, I haven't heard the conversation, but in our hospital, the training is to make sure that you also keep those two forms, if you have them, together. Pulse is indicated in California to have for people that are now facing the end of life within about a year or so. You wouldn't be surprised if those loved ones are not with us within a year. If you wouldn't be surprised, then it's definitely time to address that pulse. And hopefully God in His infinite mercy will bestow upon them more time, but nevertheless, it's a sign and the way in which we are starting to address that. The pulse and advanced directives is beneficial to have them together because they complete each other. And because they complete each other, it's always great to have them in a very visible place. The latest requirements in the industry is that you have them for sure close to the door in which the person spends most of the time, the bedroom in which they spend most of the time, especially if they are bedridden. Because like that, they are visible. And not on the inside, because when you open the door, if they're inside, nobody will see them, right? But if you can put them in one of those plastic sleeves and glue them to the door, right there on the outside, they're very visible and easy to access. So, kind of that's the reality of today's hospitalizations. And because of that, the way in which we are to really think about the end of our life has changed tremendously. But ultimately, the biggest reality here for all of us is our emotions. You see, that's where the chaplain again becomes a broker and a dealer in recognizing the emotions. Let's look at this from a different perspective. If you had an episode for yourself or a loved one, how many times do you see the doctor really coming in, taking your hand, looking into your eyes, trying to find really your name and who you are and what's important to you? You know, if you get 5 minutes of a doctor's time, you are lucky. And most of the time they are talking, and again, I heard the end of the conversation, which is so true. You know, you hear them talk, and not much is recorded. Because they are talking often in medical terms, and because the fears, and recognize that as the most important of the emotion that somebody encounters when they go into that setting. The fears are paralyzing us. I will say actually, based on my experience, that the most difficult and challenging thing about an end-of-life situation is specifically the aspect that the fears are paralyzing us. See, that is the one thing that completely breaks and destroys any sort of communications within ourselves as well as within our support group. People that were helpful before, when we are grief and bereaving, we don't want to see them. People that were of great support to us and comfort to us, we want to run away from them. Because that in our culture appears often as the ultimate failure. How different is that from the concept of what I was asked to talk to you about? A good death. And for that, I'm curious, if you don't mind, just in a sentence or two, anybody, what do you think a good death is like? Any opinions about that? Let's hear a couple of them. Here?
Passing in your sleep.
Passing in your sleep. Very good. I saw another hand.
A snap.
A snap, just like that. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? I see a hand there.
I would like to have a priest give you the anointing.
Okay. So have the aspect of a priest ministry and prepare you for the time of that forgiveness of sins and anointing of the sick. Very good, very good. Any other thoughts about that? I see a young face over there, all the way in the back.
That with peace with yourself and with everyone around you and your
die at peace with yourself and everybody around you. Okay? One more?
Having time to say goodbye to my family.
And having
Be
time
spiritually ready.
to say goodbye. Very good. And
in a state of sanctifying grace.
In a state of sanctifying grace. So, I heard you all, and here's what it comes out to. If possible, comfortable. Right?
Right.
If possible, let's have some legacies here. Find some meaning. And if possible, be at peace with God and with everybody around. Okay. All great values and all very important things. But now, let me play the devil's advocate. When was the last time that one of us chose our death? And those that do so, we don't want that, right? That's part of our conversation tonight. So, that, you see, draws us out of our comfort zone and makes us either fear it, and when we start to fear it, we get so anxious, we get so depressed, we go into bargaining, we go into all those stages of grief, right, that we all remember from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? But the aspect is that death, truly, in the perspective of a good death for us Catholics, is so much more than just those stages of grief. It's a time for us to transition from this life onto the next one. And just like we have no control when we come into this world, one way for all of us to kind of think about that is, do you guys remember when you came into this world? Okay. And most likely if you ask your parents, what they will tell you? Well, they came out kicking and screaming. Today, in the hospitals, we even get actually scores in accordance with how much you kick and scream, because that's actually a good thing. It's a sign of health. And so, if we come into this world, living the one that we knew for 9 months in the wombs of our mother, in which we were comfortable, in which we were nurtured, in which we were fed, and everything was taken care of for us, then, the truth is that we also are prone to go kicking and screaming into the next world. And so, what will allow us then to not go screaming down the street, but actually try to accomplish for ourselves this unthinkable perfect death? Because the truth is, there is not such things as perfect death. In my hospital, I witnessed about a couple of deaths a day. If it's a really bad day, about 7. Okay? So over the years, I have been probably by the head or the toes of several thousand people. I stopped counting after 3,000 or so. Right now, probably have about 5,000 to 6,000. Who knows? Each one of them unique. I actually came to a deeper realization as a chaplain that every single time I'm in the presence of a person who dies, I must feel like Moses felt in the presence of the burning bush. And even though I cannot take my shoes off, the truth is that emotionally, spiritually, I'm inclined to do so. Because it's holy ground. Doesn't matter how good or bad of a Catholic that person is. Doesn't matter how great of a person or lacking virtues that person might be. Doesn't matter if you have 4 generations by the bedside or nobody. The truth is, each and every single one of our passings are unique and amazing. And the difference between a good death and a bad death is made by all the circumstances around it. Because when the good Lord calls us, we go. So, I have people that will say, well, if God takes me, I will go because I have no choice. But, and then the bargaining starts. If I can stay until my granddaughter graduates, if I can have this last trip to Ireland, if I can just go and see one more time this movie, or whatever it is, some of them so insignificant and unimportant, and some of them of amazing depth. Whatever those realities are, they're important to the person. And when you are entering into that chamber and you're witnessing to their death, you see humanity for what it is. Frail, passing through this valley of dark shadows and death, fearing of the unknown, not being able to control and hold on to anything that can protect us and defend us from that time. And so, some of the most amazing deaths that I have witnessed to were all stories, of course, of healing. A healing that kind of is strange to be used as a word when you are talking about somebody dying. But here's where in the industry we make a difference between healing and curing. They're not the same thing. We might try to cure sometime, but we can always heal in Jesus Christ our Lord. And that healing is, again, what we talked about. The aspect of making peace, the aspect of having legacies, the aspect of knowing that our lives and even our deaths are not missed, are not just lost, but there's a purpose to them. And I will make this statement. To be able to accomplish a good death, one first needs to live a good life. If you live a good life, I will say 99.9% sure you're going to have a good death. But if the struggle comes with the life and not knowing how to live life, not knowing how to be present and how to witness to the mystery of God in His life, if you do not know how to find the things that are of true importance and waste one's life in all kinds of quarrels, in all kinds of things that are not important, then, when the time comes, regrets start to show up. All kinds of unfinished business start to come up. And then, instead of focusing on what's really happening, that mystery of God in which, again, we have tried to accomplish what St. Francis talks about. Welcome, Sister Dad. Those such simple words escapes us. Then it becomes about things that we are unable to undo, unable to resolve. And for goodness sake, I kind of remind people as they are seeking forgiveness and the aspect of healing and the aspect of trying to overcome difficulties. If for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years you went in the wrong direction, you really think that you can undo it in a matter of a few seconds that sometimes we find ourselves having at the end of life? No, we don't. It's impossible. And so, a good death is an opportunity for us to know ourselves. That's why I believe that Jesus, without trying to preach to you, that's why I believe that Jesus so beautifully tells all His disciples, especially Thomas, who was the doubtful one. This is John chapter 14. I am the way, and the truth, and the life. You see, the way, the truth, and the life were all, each and every single one of them, important words to the people of Israel, to Jesus' disciples. Moses showed the way, The Psalms and the prophets spoke of the truth. The aspect, though, that life was with God, Jesus claims that as truly the Son of God. And he brings those three in helping all of us to overcome our own emotions, our fears, our struggles of whatever nature. And staying rooted in him is to be able to overcome ourselves. I mean, just on Sunday, we heard the story of the prodigal son. And wasn't the prodigal son finally able to come, to be at peace with his father, only when he got to the end of himself? That's why that is a blessed situation for us. I'm starting to get old. I know, I don't look it, but I am. I'm starting to have surgeries. For me, it was a shocking change because I've never been sick in my entire life one day. And the most difficult challenge I ever had in my faith was to have to fly. You know, that's why I relinquish all control. The pilot hopefully knows what he's doing, and the airplane is sturdy. And off I go. But ever since I started to have surgeries, that dimension of faith now is even deeper. Because just like in the airplane, I have no control over what's going to happen there. And I come to go under the knife, just truly holding on only one thing. And that is the hope I have in God. The hope that He is giving me, the hope that He is going to carry through me, and the hope that everybody else have done all their training and they know what they're doing. But ultimately, I have no control. So, now that we're kind of coming towards the end of this presentation, what is of great importance in accomplishing that great debt in many parts depends on who we are. What is also important to us? To some of us is family. To some of us is our work. To some of us is our church. To some of us is simply, in other words, our identity. Who are we? And as God is infinite, so are our realities. And for that, there's not one perfect debt that fits us all. But it is what we are willing to involve ourselves into. It is in the way that we are not afraid of it, but willing to face it and talk honestly, in truth, about it. Be able to take our pulse when we look in the mirror and say, there's more white hair.
Or no hair.
Or no hair. That was a low blow. That was such a low blow. I almost feel like you need to go to confession. But nevertheless, the aspect of not coming to it with fear is ultimately what's going to allow us to pace ourselves. In a way, as we start talking about the advantages in our technology, not allow that to be the excuse that we will not be prepared for our death. It says about those directives that you should try to renew them every decade. If you're lucky enough to live that long from the last time you completed one. Have those conversations with the people that matter. Know the difference between an agent as a person that is designated in advance directives to make decisions for you, and that of a surrogate, which is just a person, maybe a member of the family, but a surrogate that you trust to make decisions because for whatever reason, the people that might be your agents might not be available at the time. Talk about those kind of things. Have the conversation honestly without the fear that what's going to happen. But as you start to talk about these, you will realize that that old proverbial word that the devil is not as black as it shows. I'm sorry, I might have translated that from Romanian. Or maybe Russian. Whatever I translated from, the expression is, do not be afraid to face your fears. Because ultimately, there's this little image that I remember from my training as a chaplain. It is this painting where it shows this fearsome dragon. And there's all kinds of little animals that are totally scared and trying to run away. But what they don't see is that behind the dragon is this more afraid little rabbit that's constantly pumping in the dragon hot air to make it look as scary as possible. That is something for all of us to hold on as an image of what fear is all about. And when we talk about that, it's the fear of the unknown. I cannot tell you how it is, but I can promise you that God will surprise us all. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you.